We're talking with Steve Hackett, and the new book is A Genesis in My Bed, which I read through over the weekend and got through the whole thing and did a quick download of it so I could make sure I had it in time. And yeah, it's a very good book. I was quite impressed with it. So it's good to actually chat with you about the nature of this book and some of the highlights of it in particular. I'm going to start with the line about the local government examinations board boss who talked about the what varied monotony of every job. You had talked about how this is a
Yeah,
monotonous job, and then he says, "Yeah, well, the key is to find varied monotony." Would you
yeah.
describe your career as having achieved a varied monotony?
No, I would say that I'd stepped outside that. I think that here was a guy who was the equivalent of a very sweet guy, was the head honcho. But after 6 months of doing this job, where I was basically an office dog's body and I was stuck on filing endless things to the point where there was no longer any room in the various filing cabinets. And I started dreaming about it, at night. This is my first job when I'm 16 years old, and dreaming about being an eternal filing clerk. And I thought, I've got to leave. This is it. My dreams are telling me that this is something that I can't face anymore. And I went to see the head honcho and I said, oh, after 6 months, I'm sorry, I don't think I could do this job. And he said, well, I tell you what, I agree with you. He said that if you feel it's not for you, get the hell out of it. He said, all jobs are monotonous. The great secret to find is varied monotony. Varied monotony. That was the phrase. And at that time, being a professional musician was a distant dream. And there was still a dream there, but between the ages of 16 and 21, when I got to eventually be a professional musician, there was a lot of stuff in between, a lot of jobs that he was absolutely right. They were monotonous. They didn't require much intelligence. You just had to toe the line and got to get on with it. I guess we've all done those sort of early jobs where we're just an extension of the machine or we're someone's slave or whatever it happens to be. But I always felt what I should do was to keep the creative burning. So I used to write little short stories and lyrics and various things. When I couldn't get at a guitar, I still had the idea that at some point I'll put this cool thing to good use. You've got to try and protect your sanity when you realize that you're doing mind-numbing jobs. I think it's important for all of us to still have a dream of whatever it is, whatever that thing is that you want to be, that you feel unfulfilled with. So I think it's something that the only person who can really disqualify you is yourself. You have to get hold of this internal invalidator that tells you you can't do something and get him to shut up. So all of us, when we are working at full potential, have had to the internal invalidator, which tells us we can't do it, whatever it might be, acting, stagecraft, playing, whatever it is. It's never too late. It's never too late to be functioning at your full potential. And as the thing that Jung said, it's about this process of individuation where you go through perhaps a whole lifetime, and perhaps the acorn gets to be an oak tree.
You talk about music being described in pictorial terms and the visual nature of music, and also the tie between the personal and the mythological. You mentioned that, and especially with regard to the lyricism from Nursery Crime. How is it possible to describe the visual nature of your music going back 45 years?
Well, I think the pictures change, but I think essentially music attempts to tell some kind of story, and it may be some sort of personal thing. I don't know. I mean, in my young life, I listened to a lot of blues, and that's where so many sonic developments happened within the world of guitar players. It's the area where guitars learn to scream and sustain and cry and do all of those things that we think of as the natural progression or the birthright of rock and roll. But before that, there was blues, and it was people, the bluesmen of old, who were struggling to make a living before the Brits rediscovered them, perhaps, and revalidated their work. But I'm thinking of Muddy Waters, Sonny Boy Williams, the great bluesmen, Howlin' Wolf. Some of them were great singers, some were great guitar players, some were fabulous harmonica players. But somehow they were the forerunners of the rock and roll stars of today. That's it. It's all right for a 19-year-old to stand there with perfect blonde hair and cut a dash and all that, but somehow there's been the suffering of generations before that, and I'm aware of that. It very much to my purpose, it is talking about Peter Green, who just passed on recently a few days ago, and I used to go and see him in London when I was 16 years old, going to gigs for the first time, and thinking he was absolutely brilliant. And so I was just listening a few seconds ago to John Mayall's version of So Many Roads, the Otis Rush classic, and the young Peter Green's guitar playing on that. And it's young, it's angry, it's brash and it's flash, but there's something about it. You can tell that there's real feel in there. And I think that's why so many of us love that. I know I had this conversation with Brian May when we were working together at one point, and he brought in some records, and he said, this is just to remind us of what we're all about. And it was like listening to my own record collection. It was exactly the same tracks, the same guitarists. It was Eric Clapton playing The Key to Love again with John Mayall, and it was the young Jeff Beck playing the Nassau Blue with the Yardbirds. And this was it. We shared this heritage of this stuff, and at the end of the day, I thought, well, we're all the same person, really. This is what moves us. This is what drives rock and roll. This is its roots, but more than that, it's its fire, it's its spirit as well.
The nightmares you write of, especially earlier on. I mean, I'm taken on a journey through all of the dreams you write about in the book, but especially early on, those nightmares. And then you write, you bought your first guitar, and that helped alleviate the nightmares. How so?
Well, I think if you're talking about nightmares, for a child, I remember at one point, I may have been about 8 years old, just having returned from Canada, and I fell sick, and I was literally able to see sound waves coming for me, and it was the most terrifying thing in the world, and I could hear them as well. This sort of charge of static electricity as these things snapped, and these sort of these kind of golden waves that were coming for me. And this might sound completely mad, but I'm not on here. I'm saying this is how it was, and somehow music was always this refuge from everything else. The idea of the perfect world. I was talking to a journalist the other night who was saying he was talking about writing books and having written an autobiography. He said, yes, I write books, and somebody motivated him to write and said, it's the only time you're ever going to get a chance to play God is if you're writing fiction. You invent your characters and they do whatever it is at your behest, all of this. Now, I find music was always like that. It was a refuge. It was something that nobody graded me for. It was the antithesis of school. I mean, we've all had crazy guys who were teaching us, and in England, the post-war scene was one of a number of practically psychotic schoolmasters. When I was 8 years old, I remember this guy tore up my painting in front of me, in front of the whole class, saying it was mad, and that put me off for many years. And even the subjects that I was very enthusiastic about, suddenly somebody teaching me at school might steam into me about my work. And I very early on that there was something about the guitar that was wonderful, and there was a sense of adventure and anger within it. And I thought, nobody is ever going to grade me on this. I will always be my own teacher. with this. Nobody is going to be, I'm not going to have an internal invalidator or external. Nobody is going to qualify me or disqualify me. And I would just get on with it at my own speed, my own pace. In a way, that's what music was for me.
There is almost an impressionistic description of the nature of England, the bleak English landscape, as you referred to at one point, all of the references to Pimlico and the concrete, and then the darkness of your earliest days in the south part of London. But then there's also so much almost, I mean, again, impressionistic or some the beauty of that country and the sunbathed houses you refer to. And then that's just your writing. And of course, there's also all of the lyricism of your career. What do you find about your homeland that makes it, at least to me as an American, that makes it such a vivid place to describe almost in a fantasaical way compared to, I don't know, like the United States of America?
Well, you have to understand I love both places, and I've spent many years in America. Not in one go. You have to realize, it's in chunks of months at a time. Sometimes 3 months away with Genesis. Then we'd have a couple of weeks off. Then we'd be back there. 6 months in America of 1 year, and in recent times I spent a lot of time there. I mean, America is a great place. America is a great country for so many reasons. And I'm always going to stress the positives because we have to remember what we have at home, and we have a free country. I was very aware in the very early days of America, the fact that they accepted us as Genesis, and we were a quintessentially English band, and they probably had no idea what the hell we were singing about and all the rest. But that didn't really matter. There was something there. Maybe it was exotic for them. And I think England always looked to America, right from the 1950s onwards. There was this idea that America was there first with rock and roll, of course, but England had something else. England, and I guess it's a romantic view of it. I remember talking to one guy in Miami years and years ago, a taxi driver, and he said, "Oh, I guess you get, Bobby's riding around on bicycles and there's a lot of fog and it's all that." And I get the feeling he was talking about the England of Jack the Ripper, Victorian times. And of course, yes, England was all of that. It is no longer that, is this hub of technology. We have all the old buildings. Yes, we have the architecture and we have the English villages. And many Americans fall in love with that. I mean, I was in Norfolk, the original Norfolk, where Nelson comes from, and I really hadn't been out of London for many months, and lockdown was just easing, and we went to see family, and I was sitting outside this place. It's just an English tea room where they make wonderful cakes, and I bumped into a few old friends. We were sitting there in the sun saying, "This is what it's all about." It's all about taking tea, having cake in this very old-fashioned place called Hayden, which was in Norfolk. And it's a place where they shot a film called The Go-Between, which Joseph Losey was the director of. And if you ever get to see it, it's the very young Julie Christie and Alan Bates. And it's a bit like the class war being played out. And it's a romantic story, but it's a very lovely novel, and it's a very lovely film. And there I was sitting there in the midst of history with this huge village green, and people were just breezing in and out, and everyone had time for each other. So that kind of England, where people have time for each other, it's as if there's a whole country that, compared to America, none of this can really be considered to be urban. If New York is the metropolis found in Superman comics and movies, London, by comparison, even though it's this huge city, is like a village by comparison. It's built up, but not to that degree. I don't know how to describe England. It's the place that I grew up. It was bomb sites. It was devastated by the war. I grew up in this wreck of a place, and I thought, why can't they build houses properly? What I hadn't realized was that, of course, there'd been all this economic downturn, all this damage, and we were still on rations and all this kind of stuff. So I think rationing went on until 1955. So 5 years into my young life, and my mother was still having to show her ration book. You could only get a certain amount of food. And so I think that America didn't have that. Not that America didn't pay a price, of course, becoming involved in the Second World War, which nobody really wanted to do. But of course, America has always been this special relationship. And I'm not just talking about what presidents and prime ministers say to each other. It is a very special relationship, and it's always going to be in my heart.
You mentioned at one point that classical music is always going to be a part of your soul, and you have these distinct tracks of different type of music that you return to here and there. What, or can you say that there is a musical individual core of your soul, or core of your musical soul, however you want to put it? How would you describe that, or is it truly at its center multifaceted?
Well, I think it has to be multifaceted, because I can applaud one particular genre of music and say, I listen to nothing but this, because it is eternally true. These eternal truth, these genres of music, whether it's classical music, whether it's listening to Bach or Ravel's Bolero or Mario Lanza singing Puccini, so many other things, or the work of Chopin, which is basically a man alone with the piano, the old relationship. So one comes to respect that. I mean, I've been working on something even today, which I think I'm practically finished, which owes so much to Prokofiev and the Russians and all of that. But at the same time, the same day, I'm listening to a track that's originally written by Otis Rush, covered by John Mayall, and on guitar it's Peter Green, as I was saying earlier. And they're all absolutes. Music is a pantheon of gods. If you allow yourself to be drawn, then you'll find that there'll be something in country music that you love, something in soul music, something in Tamla Motown, something in blues, classical music. You'll be worshipping a lot of gods. You'll have a lot of roots in different directions. And if you just listen to one kind of thing, then you're not really opening up to the rest of it. It's a lovely thing. Music can set aside prejudice, and you can go multinational straight away with this, and it'll take you right outside earthly realms and take you off somewhere else. I mean, Jimi Hendrix was not merely a son of America, a black blues man. I mean, he's a guy who's going to take you into outer space with his guitar work, and almost like a reanimated zombie coming back from beyond the grave and telling you what it's like. I think the whole subscription to the myth of Hendrix was that as soon as he burst onto our scenes, we knew he was very different. And my late great pal Chris Squire said one night he and his young band called Yes were playing at the Marquee, and they couldn't work out why in the front row there were all four Beatles sitting there. And they thought, we've really made it, until he started talking to the support act, who sometime later realized was Jimi Hendrix. They were there to see Hendrix. They weren't there to see him, but there you are. I mean, I got to work with Chris, and he was a great character and wonderful. I got to see Jimi Hendrix several times live, and I feel privileged for having done so. But there you are. I mean, what's in your record collection? If you're a guy of a certain age, then you'll know exactly what Hendrix was all about when he burst onto the scene. And it wasn't about having a coordinated light show or anything else. I mean, he was the show, he was the music, he moved in a certain way, and it looked as if he was the embodiment of all of those things, which are essentially improvised music with a minimum of form but maximum of spirit.
Quite honestly, I have a ton more questions I could get to, and alas, we're out of time, but there is so much to read in this book that I would recommend anyone who's listening to this right now, go ahead and read more. It's a good read. It's an informative read. It's an honest read. I can tell it comes right from you. A Genesis in My Bed, and I understand in another interview you've been working on other music, so we got more to here coming down the road, and I hopefully maybe got another chance to chat with you about future creations going down the road.
Well, thank you. I'd love to talk about future things. It's, I mean, lockdown has been difficult for all of us, but I've been doing tons of recording, lots of different things in different styles, and many things are nearing fruition, and they'll be out there soon. So it's great to talk, and hopefully to talk in future. And I look forward to being back. It's going to be April. I'll be back in the States next year, doing shows, all those things that have been deferred. Many more dates have been put in across the world. So stay safe. Love to everybody, and thank you for having invited me on your show and having a great chat.
You're quite welcome. As you write, one door closes, another opens. Take care, Steve, and we'll talk to you later.
All the best.
You as well. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Ciao.